justice to all the questions in the 5 minutes that remain.
7.
Okay, 7. I will try and make some general comments and maybe focus my responses on 3 or 4 key issues which are causing discomfort. To me, the development conundrum is actually not that hard to understand intellectually. It is like this. Let's imagine a beautiful palace, and a handful of people, a very small minority of people are living in that palace. Most people are living outside the palace. From that minority of small people living in the palace, most are pretty happy there, but there is a small fraction within them who actually know that the palace is on fire and who know that this fire will consume it in the end. However, those people outside the palace, they are constantly being attracted to the palace, both because of their own desires, aspirations, and greed, but also because though that minority which is living in the palace, which is comfortable there, is convinced that others must be invited into this palace, and that is their definition of equality, that consumption should be fair. This is the problem. And depending on who you are, which part of the minority living inside the palace you are, you will take one or another position. So it's not very hard to state the problem, but to solve it is almost impossible the way I see it, given the difficulty of reconciling human desires and understandings. Okay, I think I want to say something about technology first, because I didn't have time to address it when I was talking earlier. Sachi has helped me along by pointing out the fetish character that technology has acquired, where it's become a new church, a new religion, and most educated people around the world have started believing that technology will ultimately provide all the answers to existence, including death and so on. I've taught students who have believed that, students who have recommended to top universities in the world. One must understand the origins of the ecological crisis lie, among many other things, in the dislocation caused by modernity, in the dislocation caused by industrial modernity, which is to say by industrial technology, which has facilitated movement, physical movement of people, and now communications at a speed and at a scale which actually the ecosystems of the planet cannot bear. So if I was to point out one major cause of the ecological crisis, I would point to technology, whether we like it or not. The fact is that the movement and dislocation it has facilitated has uprooted communities, disturbed our relationship to the natural world, made us feel arrogant, made us feel we can go to the moon and colonize it, etc., etc. There's a whole series of diseases, mental diseases I would attribute plainly to technology. To quote Albert Einstein, when the hydrogen bomb was dropped in a test in the Bikini Atoll in 1954, he said, "The problem with our time is our technology far exceeds our humanity." And he wasn't making a category error. He knew what he was talking about. So I think to exempt technology and to think about technology from the planting of seeds in the soil to solving an algorithm in computer software as belonging on the same plane is to make a big mistake, huge mistake. The mistake is between confusing tools and machines, tools which can serve us, tools which we can use, and machines which use us, machines which dictate their rhythms to industrial workers who have to toil 5 miles under the earth looking for coltan so that we can run our mobile phones, etc. That kind of technology will destroy humanity, I'm absolutely convinced. If there was more time, I could talk more about it, but I think one needs to have a discriminating understanding of technology. In economic terms, in commercial terms, economists understand something called the Jevons paradox, whereby you don't use less resources if you make engines or boilers or furnaces more efficient, you actually use more resources. Because the quantitative impact of competitive system using more efficient technology is on the whole more demanding on resources. There was a coal crisis in Britain in the 19th century, and they thought by making more efficient boilers they'll reduce the consumption of coal. In fact, the consumption of coal went up because your goalposts, your targets move up when you're able to generate more power from the same amount of coal in a competitive system. So there's a Jevons paradox about production. There's also a Jevons paradox about consumption. If each car becomes more fuel efficient, people will drive more, people will buy more cars, because cars will be, in effect, cheaper to maintain and so on. And the effect is to actually increase the consumption of gasoline, not reduce it. So there's a Jevons paradox operating there. What I'm trying to show you very briefly is the ways in which technology has fooled everybody into thinking it is magic when it is actually doing something quite different. There are other reasons to doubt the nature of technology that has been created, but I'll leave it at this for the time being. The other observation which disturbed me was about historical inevitability. I do not believe most things which are seen as historically inevitable are in fact so. The development doctrine, for instance, which every educated Indian now thinks of as his own, was invented in Washington. It was invented for us. We have adopted it uncritically. 1944 is the year. World Bank is the institution. You can read the charter of the World Bank and you can judge for yourself who gave birth to development as an idea. Was it Mahatma Gandhi? Was it our own people? Was it our Adivasis? Or was it our imperial masters in Washington waiting to take the baton from European colonialists? Nothing is inevitable about development. The world was led into a set of choices which we gratefully have accepted now, and we are facing the consequences of those choices. There are points in history when decisions have become irreversible in their impact. But before those points, those decisions are not irreversible. After a certain time, yes, there is a fait accompli that happens. For instance, with climate change, there is a choice to be made today. If we don't exercise those choices, 5-6 years down the road, the door is closed. Okay? Or in the treatment of cancer, or in so many other examples you can think of, where you're dealing with living systems, there is a point up to which nature will allow you to choose, and after which nature will dictate terms. Okay? And in the war between mammon and the elements will ultimately win, not mammon. The third point, which sort of relates to what Vijay Bhai was asking, and it relates to historical inevitability. The reason why Marxism has failed, and will continue to fail in my opinion, is because of this belief in historical inevitability. Marx, as much as Marxists have always believed in progress, they've always believed that you have to go through the hard grind of capitalism before the door to socialism opens. To them, my simple answer as a humble Indian is this. You're fortunate in today's world if you are able to get a job and get exploited. Most people don't have that good fortune. Most people don't have the good fortune of being exploited. In other words, when you've excluded most people from the potential workforce of an industrial system like capitalism, where is the inevitability in socialism arising from the egg of capitalism? That egg, if it hatches, will lead to barbarism, not to socialism. So I personally believe that the whole way of interpreting history along lines of inevitability is therefore misplaced. Pawanji's question is a very important one. I don't have any answer, of course. It's a very vexing and vexed one. I'm living that vexation even as I speak in a foreign tongue to you right now. The question of language. I'll only make one observation here, which is that one reason for the deterioration of language, and it's a deterioration in all languages, and I speak here as a teacher who's dealt with students between age 10 and 20 as well. One reason for the deterioration is precisely the triumph of technology, and precisely the narrowing of attention spans, which makes language learning such a hurdle for young people today. They are simply not interested. The moment you can make money in a particular language, no matter how bad your language is, you're happy. That's how children and young people look at language today. So it doesn't matter. It could be some broken English or some broken Russian or some other language. If you can make money in that language, you're happy. Now, that's what we have taught our children with the machines which we have surrounded them with. There are other issues about language which are very peculiarly Indian, such as the fact that we speak a colonial tongue partly for colonial reasons, but also for reasons of access within a very linguistically diverse culture. What do you do when you're talking to South Indians who don't speak English, or you're talking among foreigners who don't speak Hindi, or among foreigners who don't speak Hindi, and so on? And like you said, I mean, Hindi is also not free of its own imperialistic overtones. So there are problems there which I don't have answers to. All I will say is that there is a certain force in ideas and a certain force in authentic visions which actually goes past language. And if one commits oneself to those things, I think the words come. In one language or another, you'll find a way to express it, insofar as things are expressible in words. Finally, just a brief comment on what Naren Bhai was saying about who is an Adivasi being the key question. Personally, for me, while that is a question, that is not the key question. As an individual, as a resident of urban elite India, my everyday life and my everyday concerns are actually quite far from what Adivasis live. And so I cannot possibly say that I have something to learn from them, unless by learning is meant something different from imitation or emulation. And that I'm very clear about. I think there are things to learn from others whereby we don't become like them. One one sees the otherness of the other. And like Sachi was saying, you don't speak for anybody, you're speaking not even for yourself actually, you're merely speaking. That's my philosophical position. I'm not even speaking for myself. I'm merely trying to speak as much truth as I'm capable of, that's all. Now in that process, I think in relation to the question about who is an Adivasi, I think the person who said Jinko Prakriti se prem hai, the people who love nature, which is an excellent answer in some ways. And yet you see the difficulties with that answer also, because many people, many of us living in the cities may claim to love nature, but are certainly not living or thinking in an Adivasi way. There is a certain urbanization of the mind which has happened because of the technologies that have been sold around the earth. Okay, there's television, there's satellite communication, there's mobile phones, there's internet. And thanks to all this, a certain worldview has got propagated around the planet. You don't have to leave your location in order to get, shall I use the strong verb, contaminated by this urbanization of the mind. I'm personally convinced that this is a suicidal track for all humanity. If everybody gets urbanized, if you've managed to convince those Adivasis that this is the only palace you can enter, और ये जो गोपाल की जो धरती है इसको आप भूल जाएं, ये कोई गोपाल ओपाल नहीं है, कोई आपको नहीं बचा सकेगा, आपको सिर्फ जॉर्ज बुश और बराक ओबामा बचा सकते हैं, और जो उन्होंने बताया है रास्ता, हम उस रास्ते चलेंगे तो सब मुक्त हो जाएंगे एक दिन. If this idea becomes completely universal, we are done for. Now, if we are able to eliminate any alternative vision of other ways of living, of what it means to be a human being, of a good life and so on, I don't think there is any future. And there's no point having a meeting like this either. So the only reason to engage in a dialogue like this is to probe the possibility of other visions, which actually, I dare say, this thinking will be extremely useful when the next crisis hits. I mean, the global economy is in a total mess right now. It's not going to come out of this mess ever, I'm convinced. It's a question of when the elites register the next crisis and are desperately trying to sell the old vision in some new way. And the public will have to be told some new lies at that time. And at that time, if there is an election or something, And if there is a party, this is partly in answer to Vijay Bhai's question, if there is a party which is willing to experiment with a different vision and willing to stand for popular needs at that point, then one can propose, here is an idea to consider, what do you think about it? I think it's a scandal that in a country of this size with so many environmental problems, there's not one single green party. After 42 years of Chipko, there is not a single green party. So that shows how politically conservative we are and how out of touch with facts we've become as a nation. Thank you.
I'll request Marco